What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. Alright soldiers, so you voted and I answered. So we had a poll that dropped yesterday. I know it was kind of last minute, but I wanted everybody to have like a little idea of what I was thinking in terms of doing breakdowns. I was torn between two Rune decks because, you know, Rune is my favorite class. And of course with Runecraft we'll be doing a little more theory crafting than other decks because we are Runecrafters around here. And I do want to say thank you to everyone who did vote on the poll because that did kind of narrow down what I wanted to focus on. And in this video, we're going to be talking about a specific breakdown that everybody voted for. Alright, if you weren't around during the poll or you were just off the face of the earth yesterday, which, you know, sometimes we just fall off for one day, we were talking about academics between Earthright and Academics 1. So in this video, we're going to be going over the academics breakdown. Alright, so academics, it's been around since set 2. It's not really been a good deck. I will sit here and be honest with you. It was so hard to put the deck into a category because it did not have enough support, but at the same time, the Bella Mysteria being able to search for any academic follower in set 2 was kind of decent because you were able to search out the Grea, and the Grea is able to do 6 damage as long as Anne's on the field, and a 4/5 on like turn 5 or 6 in set 2 was pretty big. It was pretty big. There weren't really that many cards that were able to do 5 damage to things, so Anne was able to get away with doing 4 damage to face or to a follower and then being able to get Grea and whatnot. But now in set 9, Academics is hitting the ground running with a whole bunch of new support. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the pros and cons of this deck. So for the pros, we have burn, board spam, filter, and free play, while on the cons we have awkward turns, hard removal, cemetery requirement, and wide boards. So starting off with the first pro, the best way of doing damage to somebody is through burn since it's not interactive. You don't have to worry about, you know, if there's a quick timing and your opponent's like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to do this to your follower as it's swinging because it has storm. No, we're doing straight burn damage. And we're doing a lot of burn damage to say so too. So our opponent's not going to be stopping that unless they play one singular card. Alright, next up we have board spam. So we have a lot of low cost followers, and then we have followers that are being played for free, so we can spam out a board pretty nicely. Alright, and then we have filter. So just like Natura Sword, we're going to be using Naturian Great Trees, and I'm using that as like huge air quotes by the way, to really filter our hand out and put academics into our cemetery to get bonus effects later on in the game. Alright, and then we have free play. So the free play and board spam kind of go together. So when we're playing one card, the other card's going to be like, look at top 5. You can, you know, put X amount of cards in your EX area, and those cards can be played for free this turn. But moving on into the cons, so what's not very good for the deck. Alright, and the first con we're going to look at is awkward turn. So Shadowverse is kind of like life. We're trying to play the hand that we're dealt. And sometimes you can get a really awkward hand, and you know, that's just how it goes sometimes with that free mulligan. But on the other hand, those awkward turns can really press on into turns 3 and turns 4, because there are sometimes play points where you need at least 5 play points to play, and you're like, okay, well I can't get as much free play here, and I can't really deal with my opponent's board, so I'm gonna have to switch to another situation, and that's gonna probably leave you negging either 1 or 2 cards out of your hand just to get some advantage. Alright, and the next con after that is hard removal. So if our opponent plays the 10-10 Israfil and then swings and then deals with our board, so we're going to have a very tricky time when removing that card because there aren't really that many cards in academics that just says hard remove stuff. But on the other hand, there are rune cards that do say that, but we really want to stay very tribal when it comes to this deck. Alright, and that point leads on into our next con. So we have cemetery requirement. So most cards are going to say, hey, if you have at least 10 academic cards in your cemetery, you get this. Or if you have 5 academic cards, then you can finally do this. So there are those cemetery requirements where we have to have at least 5, if not 10 academic followers to get the most out of our effects. Alright, and then our last con is wide boards. So it's one thing if our opponent puts out a couple followers that cost 2, 3 defense, not that big of a deal. But if we're playing against Forced, where they play out their Anastasia turn and then they buff up their whole board, if not once, twice, then we're in a really hard position to be in. Alright, so enough of the pros and cons, let's talk about our legendaries Anne and Grea. Alright, so looking at Anne, Mysterian Prodigy, so she's a 6 cost 5/5, you can choose one of the following, and if there are at least 10 academic cards in your cemetery, you choose up to 2 instead. You can 1, search your deck for an Anne sorcery and put it into your EX area, then shuffle your deck. The next Anne sorcery you play this turn costs 5 less. And then 2, search your deck for a Grea Mysterian Dragoness, summon it, then shuffle your deck. And then moving on into the Grea. So the Grea Mysterian Dragoness is a 3-cost 3/3. You can evolve for 1, but when she comes into play, select enemy fallen on the field, and if there are at least 10 academic cards in your cemetery, deal 4 damage to it and 1 to its leader. And then looking at her evo, so she turns into a 4/4 non-evolve. You search your deck for a Grea's Ember, put it into your EX area, then shuffle your deck. The next Grea's Ember you play this turn costs 1 less. While this card is on your field, if an academic spell you control would deal damage, it deals that much plus 1 instead. Alright, so essentially you're going to be paying 6 and you're going to be getting a lot of free play here, but you do have to make sure you have those 10 academic followers. So before you go into this play, it is super optimal to make sure you have those 10 academic cards in your cemetery. So going for the Ann Mysterian Prodigy is going to go for this Grea Mysterian Dragoness, and then when she's played, you're going to deal 4 to a follower and then 1 to enemy face. And then while evolving her, you can go ahead and get that Grea's Ember, and that can be another free card that you're going to be getting along with Ann's Sorcery. Alright, so let's figure out what these spell cards do. So we have Ann's Sorcery. It's a 5-cost spell. You choose one of the following. You can either 1, select the enemy leader or enemy fallen on the field, deal it 4 damage and draw a card, or 2, spend extra 3 play points, and you select any enemy leader or enemy fallen on the field, and if there are at least 10 academic cards in your cemetery, you deal 8 and then draw 2 cards. And then next over we have Grea's Ember. So it's a 1-cost quick spell. You can select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage, and if there are at least 5 academic cards in your cemetery, you deal 3 damage instead. Alright, so these are the 2 spell cards you'll be getting off both the girls, and then with Grea's Evolved, you'll be doing that extra damage, so Ann's Sorcery is going to be dealing 5 damage while drawing a card, and if you spend those extra 3 play points, then you're going to be dealing 9 damage while drawing 2, and then evolving the Grea is going to go ahead and get you that Grea's Ember, putting it into EX area, it's going to be free, and then you'll be able to do at least 4 damage to a follower since you have those 10 academic followers in cemetery. Alright, so let's talk about the early game and our low cost followers and spells. So if we're going to be going first or we need to match our opponent's freak, it's pretty nice to have our spell cards here, with our first spell card being Mysterian Knowledge. So it costs 1. As an additional cost to play this card, you reveal 2 academic cards from your hand, you draw a card, and then you put a Mysterian Missile token into your EX area. So yes, it does hurt to give our opponent some knowledge of our hand, but going ahead and putting a token that is good removal into our EX area on turn 1 is very good, especially for going second. And then next up we have Mr. Bertrand, Magic Mentor. So he's a 1-cost 1/2. You can choose one of the following. You can put a Mysterian Missile token into your EX area, or you can 2, select the academic spell in your cemetery, and if there are at least 5 academic cards in your cemetery, add it to your hand. So Mr. Bertrand really does help when we go through our Ann Sorcery, or we end up milling our Ann Sorcery through a card we might be talking about later on. But getting the Ann Sorcery back to deal a total of 9 damage if you need to really does help in some matchups. And then let's look at the Mysterian Missile token. So it's a 2-cost token spell. You select an enemy on the field and deal it 3 damage, and if there are at least 10 academic cards in your cemetery, you deal 2 damage to its leader. So if you pay attention there, that's another card that can really benefit off of the Grea Evolve. So instead of doing 2 damage to the leader, you'll be dealing 3, and then instead of dealing 3 damage to a follower, you'll be dealing 4. Alright, so let's talk about these filter cards. Alright, so looking at our first 2 cards, we have Craig, Wizard of Mysteria. So he's just a card that's old as time. He's a 2-cost 2/1. When you play him, you draw a card and then discard a card. Go ahead and help you filter out those academic followers in your hand. And the cool thing about Craig is he can evolve for 1, and he does the exact same thing on his evolve, and now he's being able to turn into a 3/2, and now he can swing into a follower to give us that extra academic card. So essentially you put 3 academic cards in your cemetery. And next up we have Freshman Lou. So she's a 2-cost 1/2, very old card. You search your deck for a 1-cost spell, reveal it and add it to your hand, then you shuffle your deck. And the awesome thing about Lou is that she can get any 1-cost spell. It doesn't just have to be Runecraft. You can get any 1-cost spell, so that being Mysterian Knowledge, Angelic Snipe if you need to, or Angelic Barrage for certain matchups. Alright, then next up we have our new academic followers. So our first one is Tico, Mysterian Spell Nerd. So she's a 2-cost 2/3. She has Ward, but when she dies, last words, you look at the top card of your deck. If it's an academic card, you may reveal it and add it to your hand. So I want you to know that this card feels amazing going first, especially if your opponent doesn't do anything on turn 1. You can go ahead and play this on turn 2, leave this upright. If your opponent deals with it, you essentially get to draw an extra card for the next turn. And then also she has the other applications. If our opponent is playing a little bit lower to the ground, we can go ahead and ward her up as well. And then next up we have Mysterian Wormus. So he's a 2-cost 2/2. You can evolve him for 2 into a Mysterian White Worm or Mysterious Black Worm. You can activate this only if you have at least 5 academic cards in your cemetery. But when it comes to play, you may discard an academic card. If you do, draw a card. If you don't, you bury this card. So of course we will talk about his evolve a little bit later, but going ahead and getting into this fanfare, this is essentially another Craig with better stats. And if you don't have that academic card to pitch, you can go ahead and put this card into the cemetery. So there are situations where that might happen, but that's probably not likely since we are running a very tribal academic deck. Alright, so let's talk about these different worms and the different situations that they can go for. Alright, so the Mysterious Wormus can turn into one of either of both of these cards. So you can turn into the White Worm that turns into a 5/5 with Ward, which heals you for 3, or you can turn it into the Black Worm, which is also a 5/5 but with a sail and does 3 damage to the enemy leader. Alright, I'm really enjoying the fact that they have these dual evolved cards, because you now have a chance to either turn into a 5/5 with ward that heals you for 3, so that gives you a little advantage, you don't have to ward up if you don't need to, or if you're a little bit playing on the back end and your opponent has a very scary card, you can go ahead and swing it in for an assail for 5/5 and then deal 3 damage to them. So I know some of y'all are thinking, oh, well, Sparta, with only using Craig and only using the Mysterious Wormus, we can only put a couple of like 1 or 2 academic cards in our cemetery at a time. Well, luckily they thought of that, and there are other cards that help us make our academic cards cheaper, if not free for the turn. So looking at our card here, we have Veil Mysterian Summoner. So she's a 2/2, but for 4, and you evolve her for 1, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck. You may put up to 2 academic cards that cost 2 or less from run them into your EX area, and they cost 2 less to play this turn. You put the rest of the bomb in your deck in any order. So this card is really good in terms for the free play that we were talking about earlier. So putting 3 bodies on the board is very nice, and they get their fanfare effects. And if you're doing a Craig, you can go ahead and put an extra academic card into your cemetery. So when your opponent does deal with your 3 cards on board, hopefully they don't banish any of them, of course, then you can go ahead and put those cards into your cemetery and they go towards your academic cards in cemetery. Alright, then next up we have Mysteria Magic Founder. So she's a 3 cost 2/4. You can evolve from 1, but when she comes into play, you reveal an academic follower from your hand. You select the enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage. While this card is on your field, any academic follower you play costs 1 less. Alright, so this card is just the card that brings everything together. So your Craigs now turn into 1 cost, your academic Wormus turns into 1 cost, and then any other followers that cost 2 turn into 1 cost. That will help out really nicely. And you do have to remember that they're academic followers, not spells, so you can't do Mysterious Knowledge for free. But on the other hand, you can do Mr. Bertrand for free when Mysteria is out on the field. Alright, so let's start talking about the removal for the deck. So of course, with the unevolved version of Mysteria, she was able to do 2 damage to something, but her evolved side also does the just 3 damage for evolving, and her evolved side still has your academic followers cost 1 less. And then next up, let's look at Owen, Knight of Mysteria. So he's going to be a very solid removal piece. So he's a 2 cost 3/2, he has Rush, but when he comes into play, if there are at least 5 academic cards in your cemetery, gives his follower +1/+1 and a sail. And he has a swing ability, so strike, you put a Mysterious Missile token into your EX area. So not only are your followers that are reserved still in danger when Owen comes out, not only do you get that, but you do get to put a Mysterious Missile into your EX area, so you can get a 1-for-1 there. And of course, with the Mysterious Missile, it's just a solid removal piece, especially if your opponent's playing a little bit lower to the ground and you don't have any way to get rid of their stuff. You go ahead and make sure you have a Mysterious Missile spawner, and then go ahead and use the Mysterious Missile. Alright, so let's talk about the honor roll. So these are the followers that were not able to make it into the final deck. If you want to include them, feel free to. Test it out, see how it works for you, but these are other academic followers that couldn't make it onto the list. Alright, Runecrafters, so let's have a little bit of a brainstorm here. Alright, so fun fact, Alusa is an academic card, and on her evolve, she's able to search for an Arcana form follower. And yes, it does kind of feel a little tempo to go ahead and spend 3 play points to look for 1 follower, but when you're getting into the late game and you're surviving like you usually are in Runecraft, having a late game boss monster to fall upon, not just Anne and Grea's little combo ability, because it'll only be dealing a maximum of 9 damage if we use all those play points that we need to, which isn't really practical. Going for Saphira sometimes is just a little bit better, since, you know, you might have at least like 7 Runecraft followers in your cemetery, and that can turn into just 9 damage for spending 9 play points, which really does help out sometimes. So I think Saphira is not that bad of a play to go for. The only downside to this combo is that Alusa does take a total of 3 play points to set up, so you do have to make sure you have 3 play points to really rest assured and, you know, stand back on. But she does turn into a 2/2 rush, so if you want to go ahead and do that in the early game, I don't see the harm in that. Alright, so let's talk about some tech for the deck. Alright, so the one thing that the deck lacks is a massive board removal, especially if those followers are, or at least a lot of the followers have 5 defense. Crimson Meteor Storm doesn't care about that. They're going to deal 6 to everybody and then 3 to face, which really does help out in this deck. And of course, with this next card, as of set 9, this is going to be the tech card of the century, with those vampire bats being what they are, or forest bats. However, I think you have to technically call them forest bats because you can't call them vampire bats. But I still call them vampire bats. I'm sorry if I did it in the last video. But this Angelic Barrage is just a beast mode of a card. Being able to snipe all those forest bats for one is just very good. Your opponent's obviously going to build up their forest bat board again, which will be very annoying, but also on the fact that Freshman Lou is able to search this card out is really helpful too. Alright, and our last tech card here is Execution, and hear me out, soldiers. So, we're Runecraft. We do play back a little bit sometimes, so if our opponent sees that we have 4 play points up, they're not going to realize we're holding up 4 for an Execution, because this is a card that came out in set 1, and this card really does help in certain situations. For example, if your opponent is playing puppets and they are going to swing with their big Sukuna, because if they go for Anastasia, they're going to swing with at least one big boss monster that turn. That's usually being Sukuna, turning Sukuna into a 6/6. Well, guess what? At 4 play points up, and you're going to play a little bit smarter and not swing with a Sukuna, because if you swing with a Sukuna, it's going to get executed. And then Execution has also other applications in removing amulets too. So if you're up against Heal Amulet, and if you think they're going to go for Godsworn Elixir, they could go ahead and get one of their amulets, so they are not going to be healing for a total of 8, and then dealing 8 damage to you, they'd be dealing 6, and that'll give you that plus up on the very next turn if they do go for Elixir, to go for your An to go ahead and get rid of Elixir, and then dealing them 8 damage. Alright, and one last example to go ahead and sell you on Execution, because, you know, like, this card is just very good to use. If your opponent is playing Sword and they go for Leonidas, and then they go for the Leonidas Resolve, we don't have a way to get rid of that because we're Runecraft. There's not anything naturally to our academic set or anything in our rune set besides this Execution that'll really help us get rid of that Leonidas Resolve. Also, to any of the Runecrafters that know about almost every single card like I do, I know that Presto Changeo card is a thing, and we're not going to talk about it because that card is that's not something we should be focusing on. We want something really solid. Presto Changeo just replaces 1 for 1, and I'm pretty sure it allows them to play their boss monster off of it, if I'm pretty sure. But Execution is just a better option because you're able to use it in any matchup. Alright, so this is a section where we talk about the game plan. So our game plan is we need to play at least 1 academic card, if not playing an academic card every turn, until we get into those 10 academic cards in Cemetery to go for An. Alright, so closing your eyes and I will give you a visual representation of how it should go. So turn 1, you should definitely do a Mysterian Knowledge, reveal 2 academic cards that you're probably going to be playing on the next turn since your opponent's going to see those cards. You go ahead and put a Mysterian Missile into your EX area, and now you have 2 play points on the next turn to either deal with a follower's thing, or you can set up for a Tico if you need to. And then in the following turn, after you've already used the Tico's ability, then you can go for either the Craig or the Mysterian Wormist if you need to go ahead and filter those academic cards you're not going to be using into whatever matchup into the Cemetery. And then in those following turns, you'll want to go for Veil. Veil's going to give you those 2 free academic cards. You play them out, your opponent's going to deal with your board, and by then you should have at least 10 academic followers if my math's correct, and if not, then the next set of academic followers you will be playing are going to give you the 10. And then in the following turns after that, we start looking into our big boss monster play when we start playing An with the 10 academic cards in our Cemetery, being able to get out the An Sorcery and the Grea. The Grea is going to come out and deal 1 damage to enemy leader while dealing 4 to a follower. You evolve the Grea, you can get Grea's Ember. Grea's Ember is going to deal that extra damage since you have that evolved Grea on the field, and it is also free, so you'll be dealing a total of 4 to 1 follower if there's still something on the field. And then on top of that, you have the An Sorcery that's going to be free, that'll be dealing that extra damage just because of Grea. So dealing 5 to face and then also drawing a card as a cantrip is very nice. And usually around this point, your opponent either has resources or they don't. So in the following turn, you can go for a play point play of An Sorcery, since you should usually at least have 2 in your hand by that time. If not, already having at least 1 in your hand and then getting the 1 out of the deck really helps. But there should be another An Sorcery in your hand by the time you get to the An Boss Monster card, which really helps out with that skill text of An saying the next An Sorcery that you play costs 5 less, so it doesn't have to be the one that you get into your EX area. And of course, there are some matchups where that play line is not going to go as well as it is, but that's just like the optimal way to do the game plan. Sometimes our opponent's going to play lower to the ground and we'll have to match our opponent's freak, and then there are some times where our opponent's not going to be playing at all, so we'll be just playing for free, and our opponent's going to have to either answer our academic cards or they're going to be taking a lot of damage to these low cost followers. Alright, so we are here at the grading of the deck. This deck is pretty awesome. I've been playing it ever since set 9 has come out. It's a very fun deck, I will say. A very, very fun deck. Alright, so if you are new, welcome. I hope you enjoyed the video. Before we get into the grade of the deck, we're going to look at a personal brew of mine that I have for the deck, and the deck code is going to be in the description below, so check it out. And also, if you're new and you haven't subscribed, I would appreciate it if you did subscribe. It means a lot to me if you would. And if you're returning, then welcome back. I appreciate all of you in voting, because I know that's probably one of you there. And if you didn't vote, I still love you all the same, and I hope you participate in the next poll that we have for the next vote of the breakdown. Alright, so here is my personal build for the deck. I really like how this deck feels and how it works. Execution has definitely come in handy in some situations, especially playing with smart players that want to go for the Sakuna play. It has helped. And then in the amulet matchup, I had to get rid of an amulet just to go ahead and either just make sure to get rid of one of their useless amulets that we're benefiting off of to go ahead and stop that 8 damage and turn it into 6, and that got me towards a bigger and play in the next turn. So the one thing I would change personally for the deck is I probably wouldn't include 3 ands, because there are situations where I draw Grea more than I draw Ann, and then Grea can't come out from the deck if she's already in my hand. So having 2 ands really does help a little bit more, since we have lots of cards that are going to be filtering. So that does mean I do have to take care of the ands that I have in my hand, but initially just only having maybe 1 or 2 ands will be beneficial in the deck. And what I would trade it out for is probably 1 and for a Crimson Meteor Storm, so we can definitely deal with a wide board that has lots of like high stats. So I think taking out an and putting in a Crimson Meteor Storm will really help out. And yes, soldiers, like I said before, I will put a deck code in the description below, so check it out. Feel free if you want to. If not, that's okay. But I think this deck is pretty solid. I like it. I've had so much fun with it. I'm glad that they have like 2 costs for every situation. Like if I'm playing against aggro, I can play Tico. If my opponents are like, I guess another thing, if I'm playing aggro, I can play Owen. And then if they're not playing aggressive, I can play a whole bunch of Craigs to draw and discard. I just really enjoy drawing cards, like I said in the last video, so drawing cards is very nice. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck. This deck is very fun to play. Now, in terms of competitiveness, you have to realize that it does have a lot of tribal cards, so you can't really tech in a lot of things, because if you tech in too much, then you'll start missing your ratios, and then you won't be having a good time playing the deck. But a lot of the cards do help with certain situations, so I like that the deck has that. And the one thing I do want to say about this deck is this deck, or at least this deck and Dragonic Duelist, really do shake up the meta for Shadowverse English Evolve, if I haven't talked about it before, and I feel like I sound like a broken record when I say this, but we're going to have a completely different meta from JP now, just because our set 10 decks are now in set 9, so now Academics has a little bit more room to, you know, be free. Dragonic Duelist has that room too, so these decks are pretty solid being in set 9. Now, if I were to give this deck a grade, I think I'd give it a solid B+. If not a B+, then a solid A, A-, because this deck has almost everything except the board removal, and that's one of the things our opponent's going to be doing in some matchups. It's just putting out a huge board, and if we can't answer that board, and Crimson Meteor Storm being a 7 cost is something that we have to do later on in the turns, and yeah, just answering a big board is one of the things that you can't really do in this deck, and that's where you will lose the most, is if your opponent plays 3 bodies on board, you can't answer them, and you try your best to spawn out bodies to really help you. They deal with one of those cards, and then they start attacking your face, and you feel pretty bad. But outside of that, the deck is very fun. I suggest picking it up if you're really enjoying Runecraft, and if you wanted to play Academics for a long time. I think this archetype does it justice. And alright, soldiers, we got through all of the academic breakdown, so this deck is very fun. I will keep saying that. This deck was very fun. I have it sleeved up. I honestly want to go and play it right now, honestly. But unfortunately, I don't have a local scene, so I have to wait around for a webcam buddy if need be. But on top of that, you all know now what the academic deck does, all the cards and everything, the combos that are going to happen for it, and if you want to pick it up for yourself, I highly encourage it. It's a very fun deck to play. In terms of competitiveness, I'd say try this deck out and try and put in different things, different tech cards that really help for certain matchups or whatever play groups like you have. So if you think you're going to go to a shop challenge and you know everyone's going to be playing Vampire Bats, then go ahead and put in Angelic Barrage into your deck, or if you know Puppet Forest is going to be there, Execution isn't bad, or Crimson Meteor Storm, those simple tech cards. And all right, soldiers, before we close out, I do want to let you know that I'm going to be probably a little bit more active on Reddit. I see that there's a lots of questions that go unanswered, or people have some questions and concerns and stuff like that. So I'm going to be pretty active on that website. I really do like how it's laid out. I was always wondering where I would keep my socials, like either on X or Facebook. But my Facebook is a little personal since it has all my stuff on it, but I do post there, so most of you kind of want to get in touch with me can also get in touch with me on Facebook too. But initially, if you want to get in touch with the Sparta's Evo side, I'm probably going to be more Sparta's Evo, excuse me, which, you know, isn't really a thing. Sparta's Evo on Reddit. So if you want to get in touch with me and, you know, have a conversation with me, you should already know you can hit me up on Discord. I'm always free to talk. And then through Reddit, I'll probably be doing the weekend questions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do the weekend questions this weekend because I was working on these breakdowns to the best of my ability because, you know, they wanted to put out these things a little bit late. But of course, you know, that's not something we'll stay and be stale about, of course. We will have a weekend question this weekend, so look forward to that this weekend. It should be on Saturday. If not Saturday, then 100% Sunday. But alright, soldiers, make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do.